The views and opinions discussed on this show are of the guests and host. They do not reflect the views or opinions of associated sponsors or affiliates. Sudden alteration in belief systems, moodiness, and confusion are natural side effects of listening to this podcast. Enjoy at your own risk.
It's the odd to Newfoundland. Ghostly greetings from your host, Jonathan. Mysteries, ghosts, monsters, and lore. East Coast esoterica and so much more. If it's odd to you, friend, it's on the Odd to Newfoundland.
Welcome back to the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Tonight's guest has a master in religious studies, but you do not need a master in podcasting editing anymore, my friends. None of that rinky-dinky, crazy, pay someone else to edit for you stuff anymore. You, my friends, are going to be powered like my podcast by Accusonus, the most absolutely perfect thing for an audio editor to have. Why? Cut your work time down in half, man. Think about this. Okay, let's say you're doing an interview, and in the background, you keep hearing the voices, okay? And sometimes you hear the voices, you're not supposed to tell people about it. But let's say you start to hear different voices that aren't supposed to be there. Like, I don't know, your neighbor's next door. Guess what? Accusonus has a way to remove noise at a certain level. And here's the really cool thing with it. This plugin works with GarageBand, Audacity, pretty much any audio editor there is. And with a simple turn of a knob, that's right, a knob, this actually does the work for you. This has changed the game for me. This has turned me into a very stressed out audio editor podcaster, into a kind of a burned out podcaster. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it cut down on the workload so that I can focus on other things, such as trying to lick my elbow. I'm very, very happy with Accusonus. Okay, they've been a sponsor of this show now for 4 years. It'll be 5 years in July, which is super awesome. Gotta love these guys for supporting the show. I love them. Check them out. They're down in the show notes. They'll make you sound way, way, way smarter than you actually are. Take it from me. Now, time for me to lick my elbow and try to introduce tonight's guest on the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast. She's got a master's in religious studies, and she's my hero because she did her thesis, get this, on tarot cards. How cool is that? Her life's been surrounded with spirits and ghost stories. She's even got some gifted family members. Guys, I'm so excited to have Jessica Newhook on the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast today. How are you, Jessica?
I'm good. How are you today, John?
I am awesome. Thanks so much for coming on and talking to all of us about the most paranormal stuff there could possibly be. Various religions. But before we get into that, I really, really, really made up my mind a long, long time ago, okay, about a couple of questions I was going to ask you, okay? Because like I said, I think anybody with a master's degree, all right? Like, we're going to have to talk about your religious studies and how the paranormal kind of swirls within it a little bit. But I really do want to talk about you personally first, Jessica. Tell me a little tiny bit about your family. Tell me a little tiny bit about how you got into, well, everything paranormal.
I mean, I've been seeing spirits since I was a young child. My very first ghost experience was an old man tucking me into bed when I was 3 and 4 years old. We lived in a very active house. There was a woman that would constantly haunt my mom, and she wasn't very nice. But the old guy, I think, was my brother and I shared a room. We're both very young. I think he was there to protect us from her. And I grew up kind of thinking that was normal. Doesn't everybody see dead people?
Bruce Willis did. Actually, no, it was the kid in the movie that saw Bruce Willis. Oh, no. I just spoiled it. Yeah, sorry, everyone.
Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. So I found that I did not realize that it wasn't kind of a common experience until I was, I don't know, 6 or 7. I was out playing and I bounced a ball really high and got it onto a roof of a school. And I went to go get the ball. And it was a weird school. Like the gymnasium was up on the 2nd floor and it had an access point to this little side roof. And I went to go get it, but I couldn't go out there by myself. And this janitor came along and he let me out and I got the ball and came back. And when I got the ball and I was playing in the yard and the teachers were staring at me going, how did you get that? And I explained to them what happened. And they're like, there's nobody that works here that anyway. So I described this guy and they both turned white. And they were like, he died 3 months ago or something like that. And I was just like, and it didn't even faze me. Anyway, so I've had a couple experiences when I was young where I had these types of things happen that I couldn't explain. And so I grew up also with my mom seeing spirits, and I would always hear voices. My dad saw auras and had alien encounters. My grandmother on my mom's side, she was clairvoyant. She could see things, almost precognitive. She would see fires before they would happen. She would read tea leaves and taught me how to read tea leaves when I was 7 and 8 years old. So my dad sees auras, my mom reads runes. So I kind of grew up with paranormal around me all the time. And when I was in grade 6, I learned about parapsychology as an option for study. Unfortunately, you need math, and I'm not very strong at math. So parapsychology was not my life path. Eventually, I stumbled upon folklore and then fell in love with religious studies, which led me to writing my thesis of the religion of tarot.
I love it.
Taking a look at it.
I absolutely love it because so many people look at the surface level of different paranormal parts. So some people look at the whole ghost hunting thing as, oh, it's just what they see on TV. Meanwhile, you have actual people with scientific backgrounds like Constantine Vradaday and all these people who are like mostly Latvian people who actually study this stuff, who really do believe there really is something to the paranormal. But most people just see the surface level. They see the lady or the man at the table reading cards for $20 a pop, right? That's all they see it as. Meanwhile, there's this gigantic, deep dive, like just an ocean of information in every one of those cards. So I'll be interested to kind of pick your brain a little tiny bit about your thesis, because I think that is just what an accomplishment. First and foremost, congratulations to you, because not everyone in the world can do that. Not everybody gets their master's and not everyone gets their thesis done. There are people who go to their grave without it done. It ends there. So thank you for sticking with it. And, I'd like to hear a little tiny bit about really the religion of tarot. I mean, what a cool name for this episode. I think we just found it.
The whole idea was to take a look at how people read tarot cards today and how that kind of correlates to other religion and religious practices. So, I mean, there is a lot of symbolism in cards, and now with the way cards are done, I mean, the history of the cards themselves are absolutely fantastic. They started actually as a very secular thing. They were a game played by Italian elite. There was nothing in particularly that was really specialized, other than it really reflected the culture and the milieu of the group that they were in. Then Egypt mania came along in the 1700s, and they were like, oh, there's these hidden secrets, which ended up actually, even though there wasn't quite hidden secrets from the ancient Egyptians in these cards, what it ended up doing was spurring this incredible massive study done by mages. And so they're people that would do individual study on their own, but their focus was on esoteric and occult studies, not necessarily on Christian ideologies, because of course during that period of time we also had Spanish Inquisition, and if you said anything wrong you could be labeled a witch, and we all know that was bad. And so it was primarily men that were involved with this, because men had the opportunity to be able to read and write and go to these institutions that were run by the church. And so they would do these massive studies where they then started inlaying all of this different religion ideology into it. So you have Hermetics, you have Kabbalistic ideas, you have numerology, you have astrology. And as the cards developed over time, and as different people were involved with it, they started enveloping these symbols into the cards themselves. And so then we come along to the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, where you have the Golden Dawn. They were a fringe Mason group, kind of loosely associated with the Freemasons that you have today. They weren't around very long. They were a very short period of time that they were around, but their impact to the world with tarot was absolutely huge, because we have two decks that kind of came from members of that group. So the first one was Arthur Waite, whose artist was Pamela Coleman Smith. And they did the Rider-Waite Smith deck, which is often what we will consider like the traditional deck or the original deck, which really isn't, but we will often, a lot of people will see it as that. And then the other deck that came out of it was from Aleister Crowley, and his artist was Frida Harris, and that is the Thoth deck. And they're almost two separate systems that people will talk about. There is a third system, and that is a deck from France. And the name escapes me right off the top of my head. But it was widely used as France's kind of part of the game, but then turned into a tool that they would use for tarot. And it's really interesting, because there's kind of like three different systems now that readers will refer to. And a lot of times you'll find most of the people interested in that Rider-Waite Coleman Smith deck.
There you go. It's a mouthful, no doubt. And it's so interesting to know that history of something that's so prevalent with so many people, and so many people believe wholeheartedly in the decks. I've had some really good tarot readings, and I've had some really bad ones. I'll be honest. I remember having my cards read by my Aunt Kay, and she could read the cards, man. And not just tarot cards. She could use a regular deck of cards and read your cards for you and talk to you about all kinds of stuff. And, I always kind of wondered, man, why my family was so paranormal. And it doesn't surprise me at all that feeling of, can we know the future? This comforting thing. It doesn't surprise me that people were chasing it, especially more so when the lifespans were shorter and people were dying left, right, and center all the time. It's like it made so much sense for there to be a spiritual movement at some point, and for people to kind of use these. But my God, the staying power of this practice, it's unreal. It's still very prevalent today. In fact, I'll be honest, I think I know more people who are into, the paranormal and into, tarot cards and crystals and stuff like that than they actually go to church. It's a different type of spirituality. And I kind of wonder sometimes too, I guess in your research, have you encountered any religious or spiritual practices that claim to facilitate communication with the spirit world? And if you did, how did you kind of approach studying the practices? I always think of tarot cards as one way of kind of connecting to something else, but has that ever happened, or have you ever been a part of that before?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you call the spirit world, and when you're talking to these different religious groups and having different religious experiences as to what you would consider kind of part of that paranormal thing. Like, just think about even just in some of the Christian denominations, you'll have people, I believe it's Pentecostals, that will speak in tongues. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to be direct communication that they have, like kind of almost like a secret language between themselves and God. And what is God but nothing other than a supernatural being, a universal force that connects everything to everyone, at least, and that's in my interpretation. Now, that may be offensive to some Christians, so I am very careful when I say that, because that is part of my spiritual side and part of my academic side kind of coming together and saying, there's a lot of elements of spirituality in a lot of different religions, and they come across as being very differently and represented very differently. So even, if you speak to indigenous peoples, the way they represent their spirituality and their connection to spirit is going to be different than a Christian, which is going to be different than somebody who's a Jewish practitioner, which is, again, different from a Muslim. And even though, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are all part of the Abrahamic faith, there's still an element of difference within them. Now, there's always within those three, there's definitely a vein of mysticism that flows through them. So there's a Jewish mysticism, and before Christianity got the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah or the Kabbalah, depending on how you pronounce it, it was actually very rooted in Jewish mysticism. And then Christianity got a hold of it and kind of appropriated it, modified it and changed it, which then when the mystics got a hold of it and applied it to tarot, modified it and changed it again, appropriating it in a different way. And then you have, astrology. Well, astrology was primarily an Eastern ideology that the West adopted. Just like tea itself came from the East. It was not a traditional drink until much later on when trade routes were established, and tea was like, hey, maybe this isn't such a bad thing to drink, So religion is, there are many different ways of people viewing their spirituality within their religious context. And that's kind of what I was trying to break down, is this idea that religion is more than just Christianity. Because when we say you're religious, often we refer to them, especially in North America, when you say that person's religious, you actually mean that person's Christian.
Yeah, I've actually come across that a few times. Like, in different parts of the world, it could be different things, though, obviously. Like, if you say someone's religious, oh, yes, he's a devout Jew. It's like just based on where you live to, right? So there's a geographical part as well, Jessica, I guess is what I'm trying to get at as well. Here in Newfoundland, if you're religious, you're Christian, more than likely.
Yep. Yeah. And that's common across North America. And so what I was trying to show is that, religion, it does have a bad name attached to it. But, there is more to religion than what we have within the confines of what our definition of it is. I mean, the word itself is Latin, and it means to bind yourself to one's beliefs. So understanding that basic knowledge of religion, it just kind of really went, if I'm binding myself to my beliefs, and I do believe in spirituality, and I believe in this phenomena of tarot, and I do believe that, in the right circumstances, it can help people, not hinder. Why not investigate it as an actual religious practice?
Well, in a lot of ways, though, there's a lot of faith in cards. Like, I look at faith as an example. Faith is the belief in something that's not in front of you. Simple as that. Like, it's not physically tangible, right? There's no physical, tangible explanation for a piece of paper with a drawing of something on it to tell me what's going to happen in my future or what's going on around me right now. Yet, you can't deny the accuracy sometimes. So, it's a really interesting belief system, but also I've even had people who don't believe in tarot cards go, man, like the person was kind of dead on about everything. I still don't believe though. So it's, I kind of try to get away from it at least a little bit. I guess whether or not you believe in them or not, sometimes there's still credibility, and that kind of harkens back to with like my whole paranormal investigating thing that I did for many, many years. Just studying and researching electronic voice phenomena, which I do believe there's something to, 100%. In particular, the multiple word communications that come through over recorders. This kind of stuff, when we capture it out there, it exists, there's data, but because really what's in front of us right now, that the current paradigm, the current physics we use, it's just no way to recreate it. So I wonder sometimes, as we advance and as we learn more and more, I mean, for God's sake, it was only a couple of years ago we figured out gravity had waves for sure. It was the first time. The bare basic stuff. So I look at science as kind of faith-based as well. And, for a lot of people, they might get offended when I say that. So we got to keep an understanding that we're open mind to, a religious or spiritual background and a science-based background. When they both come together, interesting things start to happen. And this is where I could not wait to talk to you, because I realized that this is a person who's quite intelligent, who has a very good understanding of everything that's going on around them, and can pretty much cherry pick from any religion in the world. Like, oh my God, I got some questions, man, about correlation. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm most excited for. The idea that there's things in different religions all over the world that started at different times that correlate. Similar beliefs. I guess that's what I'm trying to find, that, well, common thread, so to speak. But are there some things that seem to really stand out with the correlating part of different religions all across the world?
Well, there is definitely correlations that occur. And now, keep in mind that writing as a form of communication is relatively new in the history of humans, right? Mm-hmm. We have not been writing that long in comparison. So primarily the way of telling story was through oral communication. And when you take a look at oral communication, the art of being able to tell a story and being able to present it, that filters through. And so a lot of times the stories that were experienced have been transferred through different translations now because of our writing. But way, way, way back when, the only way to transmit it was orally. And so you have people with these oral traditions and oral information that bring this knowledge and information forward. That sometimes I find science a little hard. I find it that they kind of poo-poo it. It's not that important. But yet it can be very important because it can provide us with some truths that we're not as maybe, like you said, able to produce in ways of a lab. Folklore kind of goes into that area too. So if you're able to speak to any folklorists, they'll often talk about that. And a lot of my arguments when I was talking about, some of this idea of, these personal experiences, anecdotal evidence, sometimes it's just anecdotal evidence, but sometimes it does have some background and meaning to it as well. And that kind of basis of my research I kind of came from was from folklore itself. So it does have quite the, because it has to do with the sharing of oral information in an informative way. Though a lot of times oral history cultures are very controlled with the way that they present it. But David Hufford talks about that in relation to his article in Visionary Spiritual Experiences in an Enchanted World. And he's a doctor. He's a medical doctor. And you hear about parapsychology now kind of entering into the realm of past life experiences and near-death experiences, because that seems to be the area that they are able to study a little bit more frequently and have more evidence for, that can be a little bit more consistent versus my one-time opportunity where I had a voice all of a sudden just yell at me and tell me something that I had no idea about, and then to pass it on to the next person. They're like, oh my God, that came from, that's what this person always said all the time, and they passed away just recently, right? Like those types of experiences are really hard to reproduce. I don't know how to reproduce them in a lab.
The closest thing I came to doing this, like, obviously I got really, really deeply involved with this, and I decided, like, if I was going to take this seriously, like, the best thing I can do as a field researcher, which is what I'd be, is to try to get that repeatable data. And let me tell you, it was darn near impossible, although I did manage to do it. There was a place, I don't know if you're familiar with the Admiralty House Museum in Mount Pearl. It's a communication museum for audio phenomena and stuff like that. It was used to spy on the Germans. We used it.
Oh, cool.
So this place has Marconi's kite in it and stuff like that. Really, really nice place here in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland. My hometown, by the way. Little shout out. But I was very fortunate to be able to lock myself in one of their rooms where I felt like there was something there multiple times over the course of 3 years. But the recorders in the same place and the same measurements, everything down to a freaking inch. I had it down in that room trying to recreate it. And there was things that came through, but it was never from the same spot in the room, so technically it wasn't recreatable. And this is where we kind of run into that wall once more, that paradigm of science, the current physical model. I mean, it doesn't make any sense right now anyway, and we're starting to discover that now that we can see up further. Basically, now we can see into the past, which is pretty cool, looking out over our universe now, which is super cool. And we're realizing there's a finite end. So it's kind of like, now what? And people are like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Needless to say, there's enough there, 100% in the realm of science, to say, I mean, you can't recreate the Big Bang, so I guess that never happened. I mean, duh, we all know it happened, but guess what? We can't recreate it. So it's kind of like, how do we recreate that in a lab? We can't take inanimate matter and make it come to life. We don't have that science yet. So how did that happen? We can't explain it. There's so many such trivial little tiny things along the way that have just been swept under the rug. Like, well, we'll figure it out later. It's like, I don't know, man. Sometimes I feel science is its own religion, 100%. And it has revised itself many, many times. It's kind of funny in a lot of ways. People clung to Newtonian physics, man. Clung to it, and guess what? It ain't working. So there you go.
Well, and Richard Dawkins, like, all you have to do is just listen to him, and you can hear a lot of the similar phrasing and languaging and the way things are put together in relation to the idea of atheism, and just, and that in itself almost presents itself as its own religion. And I know that'll piss off a lot of atheists by saying that.
But wait now, religion is the belief, right? Religion is a belief in a principle, or what you perceive to be a principle. Like, there has to be
blind your beliefs too,
right? So saying there is nothing, you believe in there's nothing. So it is a religion. Yeah. It absolutely is. It's we got to take the religions out of the word religion, basically, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because easily you could have somebody who is that much of a hockey fan that is that fanatical that it could be considered a religion, I
was a devout Detroit Red Wings fan until, they won in overtime against Montreal and still never made the playoffs because the Washington won. And then yet last night, Washington knocked out of the playoffs. You know what I think? I think I do believe in Detroitism. I am a Motor City Taoist. And I really do believe 100% that was Carolina.
Hey, and there's so many different ways of being able to look at our approach to our beliefs, and that's and that was really kind of my passion, the desire to do the religion of tarot, because I just found, even just reading through academic studies from just looking at New Age, there's a lot of negativity I found towards it. And I think I might have been a little hard on the scholars in my thesis, reading back now afterwards, just because there's this disconnect between, belief systems and what is considered, I guess, the standard or the bar. So are you setting secularism as your bar? Are you setting Christianity as your bar? But it just seems like when we get into this idea of spirituality and New Age ideologies, it's poo-pooed on many, many different levels in many different directions. And from the people who feel as though it's devil worshiping to the other side where people are just think it's a cloak and dagger and nothing but a series of magic tricks. So yeah, it's we're stuck in the middle between these two different belief systems, and we need a voice. So that's why I wrote it.
I think it's interesting, and it's fun to challenge the scholars, man. I love that because at the end of the day, it's their beliefs that are getting stretched sometimes. And I think, just in my own travels and circles, I really do feel that you wind up alone when you follow the paranormal path, because most people cannot relate. Most people don't want to relate. You got to understand, you're shaking the fundamental belief systems of people by telling them, yeah, I'm thinking ghosts are real, and I think I might have got something here that proves it. Yeah, well, it's not real proof unless it's recreatable. They walk away. So it's like, let's disregard this fact. It's like back 30 years ago, the placebo effect was it was so well known that it was literally part of the control for experimentation with drugs. It was literally part of the literature, this paranormal, unexplainable placebo thing that just kept showing time and time again that if you give someone a sugar pill and tell them it's going to cure their ulcers, it would cure their ulcers for no apparent reason. And we still have no explanation of that. And we have it documented. It was literally meant to show that people, basically the idea of a placebo was that people can't lie, or they can lie, and we're going to see what happens, right?
Yep.
What ended up happening was the opposite. Everyone started having paranormal experiences, and next thing you know, I no longer have a headache. Well, must have been the sugar pill. I had the placebo. I didn't know. There were so many times in literature and reading back over that, it's just like, man, how can you just keep pushing that third paradigm? There's three paradigms. It's the physical, the metaphysical, and then we have no freaking idea. And you'd think that science and the metaphysical be able to say, yeah, we don't have any idea how this stuff works. But no, we're both wrong. Neither of us can work together. And that's what you usually get, right? I have seen the absolute beauty of a religious, spiritual belief system and science working hand in hand. And I've seen it firsthand with my father. He got diagnosed with terminal cancer back in 2009. And I'm very happy to say that I was at Irving today with him eating a really, really large breakfast. He's still alive today. The doctors can't explain it. No one can understand it. They gave him a short amount of time. They said 6 months to 1 year was his prognosis. He's still here. They can't explain it. He's one of the longest living renal cancer patients in the world. And I'm going to tell you what makes him cling to this world is his religious beliefs. Abso-freaking-lutely. He's out to my grandmother's house reading a rosary every Monday. He's a very religious man. And whether you want to believe in God or not, there's something about the practice, the constant pull and push of spirituality that seems to really influence people's health. Have you come across that much in your travels?
I have, and I even did some of that. I did some readings in my academic journals. Unfortunately, I don't have the titles of those journals with me, but there was a study that they did that talked about spiritual healing. And it was fascinating because the one thing that struck me about that article was that it wasn't so much of the belief of the person receiving the treatment that did help, but it was the belief of the practitioner in their ability to treat that seemed to help improve the odds of improving the scenario for the person receiving the treatment.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So, yeah, so sometimes it didn't cure it completely, but what they looked at, was there an improvement? Was there this? And what they found was that when the practitioner themselves believed full-heartedly, and then along with the belief of the patient, that both together seem to combine to be able to improve the stasis of this person. Now, again, what that connection is, there's this, I do believe that there's an energetic connection between everybody. For example, like I did demonstrations at MUN for a spiritualist course, where I had students think of negative thoughts and positive thoughts. I had them turn away from me, so I couldn't see any facial expressions. And I'd be like, okay, just think of something really happy, really something that was good with you. And then I want you to think of something really, really negative. And then when you're ready, I'm going to get you to hold one of those thoughts in your mind. And I approached them with dowsing rods. And when I approached them with dowsing rods, when they had a really negative thought, I could get really, really close to them. And when I approached them with dowsing rods, when they had a positive thought, it was much further away. And it happened 3 students in a row, exactly the same thing. They didn't tell me anything. And it was really interesting to see the response of people. And I'm like, well, that's because we all have energy, and negative energy and positive energy impact us all differently. So there's got to be a connection there. And that's, I think, what we're getting to closer when we're doing studies like meditation. What does meditation do for the body? What does, when we have these near-death experiences, what happens? And I think we're starting to see science kind of be able to figure out ways that they can start looking at things to be able to recreate it. So I'm holding out hope that, that it will come around and won't be so distant. But I do believe that there is a connection of energy between people, and that I do believe has to do definitely with the healing. So with your dad going and praying on his rosary every Monday with his, he's removing himself from the mundane world, putting himself in a sacred space to be able to really connect with that energy that's around him, that's just unadulterated love. And it can be very healing. Absolutely.
I always kind of laugh when people are like, rosary beads. Pfft, I got no time for that. I just like to meditate. I'm not really religious. It's like, you realize that's what they do with rosary beads. That's literally what you do with them, is you meditate with them. It's like, anyway.
Well, you're taking yourself out of the mundane and putting yourself into a sacred space.
That's right.
And that's part of the ritual practice of religion. So anytime that you do that, like Buddhists were the ones that really, Buddhists and Hindus were the ones that introduced the idea of meditation to us. And actually their religion, I find, has been able to produce more results from the scientific community than Christianity. And perhaps it's because a lot of the scientific community tend to be from a Christian-based society. So you can be a little bit more observant and less, maybe your biases don't get in as much of a way.
Yeah, like it's more about the self. It's more about the self and the inner work with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not the cross on your back you have to bear and be a good person. It's more about, I must be at peace with all that's around me. It's a different thing, which is just funny in the mind of a scientist, because that's pretty much what they want from the scientific method. For everything to be in harmony and peace and recreatable. So, once again, science might be religion. I'm just saying. Just putting it out there. We're going to get in lots of trouble for this one. Oh, my goodness. I look at our time, and we're almost done. I got to ask another bomb question here. Okay, you ready?
Okay.
Here it comes. So, you've heard pretty much every religion on the planet. I'm not going to say all of them. I mean, there's new ones that pop up every day, okay? Okay, especially in Nevada for some reason. I don't know why. They just pop up. I'm just going to throw this out there to you. The afterlife. Like, what do you when I think of just the Christian view of the afterlife? Like some people think we go to hell, some people think we go to heaven. You know, there's the Buddhist part of the afterlife, like the reincarnation ideas. And then you got like the really, you know, different types of Christianity. We'll say, like, I like. You ever see the movie Coco? Like that movie is awesome. That whole idea. I really hope that is what people think the afterlife is. That'd be so much fun. Like, I'm wondering your take on this. You know, we got the Christian worldview already, right? We're not going to worldview that one. Some of the more interesting afterlife ideas from different cultures out there that people might not have heard much about. I think that'd be kind of cool to share.
I think the one that kind of intrigued me the most was from voodoo and the idea of possession.
Okay.
Where spirits would come in and be and possess the body. And so it's this idea that there's spirits outside of us and entities outside of us that come in and try to take over our bodies. And I always found that as kind of an interesting take on the afterlife, because it's not like Coco. It's not like, hey, I'm happy I passed away, I'm spending time with my family in the afterlife. It's a little more sinister.
Yeah, it's pretty definitely darker. I see the shaman there, like I see it. And you know, the idea, like, so where are these spirits, you know, are they earthbound then? Like in that religion?
Well, yeah, I don't know, because I didn't do a deep dive into it. So, you know, this is just kind of something that always kind of fascinated me. It's like, where are these spirits? Where do they come from? Are they our past loved ones? Are they, you know, remnants from a spirit that was cursed? You know, because a lot of times they'll believe in, when there's possession, there's usually people do believe in cursing as well. You know, is there, or is it just, you know, a simple medical explanation where, you know,
it's rabies.
Just having, has to be rabies. Somebody's just having a really bad mental breakdown.
You mentioned a little bit of precognition and stuff like that within family members and gifted family members and stuff like that. And I just kind of wondered, you know, some of the frameworks, the approach that different religious frameworks, you know, concept of psychic abilities or mediumships, and are they common threads? Is there divergence of beliefs there? Like, it seems like the psychic and mediums have been a part of a lot of different religions. It's really interesting, actually. It's probably a little bit more prevalent than, you know, we think. It seems like, well, maybe there's psychic and mediums out there for real, and they just so happen to be a part of each religion. Is it possible that there's a common thread there, though? You know, we talk, you know, when I talk to a medium, they say we speak to other spirits. What happens if you're in a religion that doesn't really have spirits in it? So what happens then? Like, you just get the voices in your head? It's, I don't know. I guess I got myself talked into a bit of a circle, which I should, because it's a very interesting subject.
Well, if you just take a look at Buddhism and the art of meditation, they will tell you that you will start seeing things happen before they happen. That you will experience a bit of the psychic phenomena as part of the meditative process. And they're, depending on the sect of Buddhism, they're not necessarily a big believer in all these spirits and spirit guides. They would embody ideas of what spirits represent, but spirits are operating often on a different plane, and they're not in the same context of what we would consider spirits from a North American's perspective, mainly because we're ingrained in Christian ideology. So it's fascinating, because they just say that it just happens and there really isn't a connection to spirit.
Okay, so...
And so it's just, you just pick up on stuff. And so then that really gets really kind of interesting when you take a look at predetermination and Calvinism in regards to Christianity, because then are we actually living a predetermined fate determined by God, or are we not? And do we have free will to be able to make the choices on our own to be able to live our life?
Well, there's also that. There's definitely a conundrum there too, because he's the all-powerful. So, like in the view of the Christian religion, God is the all-powerful, all-seeing, omnipotent, exists in different realities at all times God. So it's like he kind of contradicts himself though in that regard. It's kind of like, how could this not be controlled by him? How could he not control all religions? How could he, it's the way it's set up? It's almost it's almost as if it's meant to encompass all religions eventually, I think. Yeah, there's definitely an idea of permanism that's there. I think Aldous Huxley kind of created that terminology, and it's the idea that there's kind of an underlying thread between all belief systems that kind of connect us and intertwine everything. Though no two religions are exactly the same, and not every religion has a God, and not every religion has spirits, and not every religion has a devil, and there are significant fundamental differences. Yet when you look at the practice of people, and when they're able to separate themselves from this idea of the mundane, like going and doing that same thing over and over. I get up in the morning, I brush my teeth, I brush my hair, I go to work, I come, I finish work, I have dinner. At some point in time, I like to separate out from that and create a sacred space for myself. So I go into a meditative state and just allow myself to kind of be in a different place. And, so you're separating yourself out. So it's almost like this creation of sacredness that's important, kind of the important thread throughout religion. I have had just the best time with this conversation. Very deep, very, very interesting, and very factual, which I love. I love that. I love when people have a good, solid background in something, and I cannot thank you, Jessica Newhook, enough. Master in religious studies. She's got spirits, she got ghost stories in the mind, so much so that she wrote her thesis on tarot cards, which makes her my hero. Guys, the Larkin Point Facebook group, she's trying to grow this thing. I'm going to connect it to the show notes. And I just want to thank you so very, very much for being a guest on the Oddtonewfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Thank you so very much. You are more than welcome. It was my pleasure. I had a great time.
Attention all Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn radio listeners. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast brings you the best in East Coast esoterica on the first of every month. Together, we can keep it growing by sharing the show on social media, subscribing to the show wherever you may be listening to it from, and by leaving feedback about your favorite episodes. John certainly needs a friend like you to help make his dreams come true, minus the alien abduction dreams. That is not cool at all. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast, always available, always free, always odd.